welcome back to this series of videos on the IDEAScripting, creating an IDEAScripting dialog. So we've made it through, we've created our dialog, we've got checkboxes, we've got radio buttons, we've got a calendar, we've got a help dialog, we can select the file name, we can enter in a high value, we can select an amount field, and so on. So our final stage is accessing the different variables or the different items that we've selected from the dialog and going in and using them in our code. And also as part of the final step is validating them to make sure that there's no problems or errors with the code. You know, did we actually select the file name? Did we enter a high value? Is the high value a numeric? And so on. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and create a bunch of variables that we need to select. So the first one I want to add in is we've already created the variable to hold the file name. Next one is we already created the date because we've had a variable called sDate which we can use. Next one is I want a variable to hold the high value, and I'll do that by calling this by dim. So we'll just call that dim. I'm going to set it up as a double because the variable could be a number with possible decimals. So I'll just call it high value. I'll put a D for W as double because doubles you can have decimals in there. Next thing I want to have is a variable to hold the amount field. And then this is just a string because we're going to put the name of the field in there as string. The next items are for the AP test and the JV test. And since there's multiple tests, instead of setting up a variable, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an array to hold all of these variables. So I'm just going to call this dim AP, AP tests. And I'll put in 2 because remember that arrays start at 0. So we got 3 tests. So the first test would be 0, second test 1, third test would be 2. And I'll do the same thing as JV tests. And it'll just hold like a 0 if it's false, 1 if it's true, and so on. So then we can test to see if those tests have actually been selected. And if they have, go run the appropriate code. And finally, I'm going to create an integer to hold the amount type, to hold whether or not I selected the first option, second option, or third option, and so on. So here I've got a variable for the file name, start date, high value amount, the amount field, the AP test, the JV test, and the amount types. So you got to make sure you've got variables for each one of these. Now, where I would go and grab these variables is except in instances like for the file name and the date, because I'm using these within the dialog. The only time I actually need these is once I want to exit. And what I want to do there is I'm going to do this when I hit the OK button. So I'm just going to comment out this for right now because I don't want it to close because I want to do some testing to make sure I'm getting the right variables. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go capture information for the IP test and the JV test. And remember up here when we were setting them, I used a loop. So I can use a loop to go grab them. So I can go from I equals 0 to 2. Next I. Now I have to go play with this a bit because remember the values here are 1, 2, 3. I probably could have done 0, 1, 2 if I'd actually thought of it, but I hadn't. So I named it 1, 2, 3, so I'm not going to bother go back and changing it. What I'm going to do is do a bit of manipulation here to be able to access these variables. And what I'm going to do first off is I'm going to loop through and I'm going to grab the information. So I'm going to do AP tests. So 0 to 1 equals, I'm going to grab the value. And if we remember, the IDs here were the check AP tests. So here I can go in check AP tests. I got to get rid of the 1. And since I'm starting with 0, and this actually starts with 1, what I end up doing is I'm going to do I plus 1. So this will get the value for item 1 if it's 0, 2 if it's 1, and 3 if it's 2. And I'll do the same thing for the JV tests. And before we continue on, let's just make sure this is working. So I'm just going to do a message box, and let's go see what prints out with the AP tests. So that's why it saved this to true. So now we're not going to actually exit right now until I'm actually done. So I'm going to run this. Got a syntax error, and I forgot to put the equals in there. That's why I got the syntax error. Hopefully you all caught that. So let's go try running this. So I'm just going to go test 1 and 3. So this should be 1, 0, 1. So that 1, 0, 1. Yes, so now we know it's working. So now I'm going to go back. I can get rid of this. And also, the problem right now is I have no way of knowing whether the person selected at least one test. You know, if the person goes in, enters in all the information, hits OK, but doesn't select any tests, nothing's going to actually run. So I want to do something where I can go in and see, okay, did they actually select the tests? At least one test. And how I'll do that is I'm just going to create another variable, or a couple of variables for JVs and whatever. So I'm going to call something called, I'm going to do a boolean, AP tests as boolean, and I'll do the same thing, boolean JV tests as boolean. So this will just be a flag to indicate whether or not they've done it. So by default, the AP test and the JV test is going to be false. So what I wanted to do is when I'm going through the OK button and the person actually selected 1, then to select the true. And how I do that is I can just do if, I'll just look at the dialog value. And here I'll just go grab here, check AP tests. Same thing here, I got to do the I plus 1. So basically if it's one's clicked on, if it's true, then I can go in and have the AP test equals true. So every time it goes through here, it's going to set this as true. And the same thing is here for the JV test. So if one AP test or one JV test is equal to true, has been selected, then the variable becomes true. And then what I'll do is when I'm going through and actually checking, I can go in and see if these are true or not, and if they haven't, then I can issue a message. And I'll do that in a few minutes. So next things I want to do is I want to go grab the high value. So here we go, let's go high value. And this here, to access this, is I'll do the dialog demo, much like I did when I was doing for the calendar in the previous one. And the ID here was text high value, so let's go grab that. And let's do a message box, you know, just to check to make sure it's working properly. There we go. Next one after that, I want to go the amount types. Same thing here is the dialog demo dot, and since I want to get the item as part of the group, I'm going to use the ID for the group and not the individual ID buttons. And the same thing here is, you know, types. Oops. Types, and then let's go get the amount field. So we'll get the information from the drop down here. Now how I'll do that is I'm going to select the variable, and here what it actually returns is not the name that was selected, but the item. So the item list starts, if I select the first one in this list, it'll be 0. Second one is 1, 2, 3, and so on. So that'll be returned it. So what I need to do is pair this up with the array that holds the names. And then I can go grab that information. So I'll just use the dialog demo again. And here we can go in and get the ID. And I'll add on 1. Because our list box, remember when we created it with the field, it started with 1 because the first field was number 1. But when it gets transferred over to the drop down in the dialog, it actually now becomes 0 as the first item for whatever reason. So now if I want to access this, I have to add on the 1 because the list box starts at 1. This starts at 0, so I need to add on the 1. And let's go do a message box, amount field, and that's amount. Okay, so let's go run this and see what it gives us. Oops, AP tests. Make sure we got that right. Oh, I forgot the 0 there, the S there, sorry. Okay, let's go try that again. Amount types. Amount type. Gotta decide whether I want zeros or not. Now let's go try it. So let's go enter in our high value. So I'll do, 12.25, 24, whatever. I'm going to select our file. What was it? Bank transactions. Wasn't that? We wanted a few options here. So let's do sales plus tax. That way it's in the middle, so we make sure that we're actually getting the right one. And here, let's do positive and see what we get. So let's click on OK. So here I'm getting the high value, 12.24. Good. Type 1, so this would be 0. We'll go try that. Sales plus tax, excellent. So let's go change that sales tax, change that to 0. 12.24. Good, 0, perfect. And sales tax. Okay, perfect. So we're grabbing all that information. Good stuff. So here I'm just going to comment out the message boxes. Now the last step here is I want to make sure that the information has been properly entered in. So now I'm going to use a bunch of if statements to go through and check each item to make sure that it's correct. So the first thing I want to make sure is I want to make sure that the user has selected a file. Because if they haven't really selected a file, then, we got to stop it because we can't do anything without a file. So if they haven't entered a file, so if the file name is equal to blank, then I'm just going to do a message box. Please select the file. Now, if that's done, now I'm just going to do a bunch of else ifs and check. Same thing here is I want to make sure that the date isn't blank, and if it is, then I'm going to enter in please enter a date. Next one here is the AP test, remember here. So I can go else if, be AP, or so not be AP tests. So if there's no AP tests been selected, then message box, please select at least one AP test. Same thing here for the JV tests. And actually, I could just copy this over. Change it to JV. So there we got that. Next thing is for the... Now, I'm not actually going to bother to do the amount type to bother to test, because with the dialog, there's always going to be at least one selected. And whether it's not the 0, 1, 2, that's up to the user. But there's always going to be at least one selected. There can't be none selected because of the grouping. So I don't actually need to test that. Same thing for the amount field, because the first item is shown here. So if the user selects a file, there's always going to be at least one to drop down. I guess technically I should add some code in there, because in actual fact, if a user selects an IDEA file that has no numeric fields, then there'd be nothing here. So I should test for that, but I'll leave that up to you if you want to go add that in. The last thing is the high value. So here I got to do several tests, because a user can go in, and select, enter in like ABCD or something like that. And if they enter that in, and then that goes in, if you're using it in an equation, if it's ABC and IDEA is expecting a numeric, it's going to throw an error. So now I want to do another test. So I want to just do else if. And I'm just going to do trim the amount field. So in case they entered spaces, it's the same thing. Then I'll do the message box. Oops, I'm misspelling the message box here. Make sure it's that nice gold. I can say then the high value field is empty. Or not numeric. Oh, sorry, this is just empty. Please enter an amount. And then the next one here is I want to make sure that it's numeric. So if it's not, is numeric. Nice little function to test if a character field is numeric. So if it's not numeric, then I go message box equals, please enter a number in the high value field. And then if there's no problems, the last one I'll do is else we can exit the menu and go run the script, and if. And there's one other thing we could do, is if you wanted an integer here, because right now we're going to decimals, we want an integer, you'd have to do one more test, and the test would be else if integer value amount field is equal to, or not equal to, value amount field. And then, so what I'm doing here is I'm getting the field as is, and on this side I'm getting the field, but I'm changing it into an integer. So the integer drops any decimals. So if I don't want any decimals, these two should be equal. If there are decimals there when there shouldn't be, then I could throw an error. But in this instance, I don't mind if there's decimals or not, so I'm just going to comment that out. Okay, so that's true. So let's actually go in and try this out. So let's go run this. So let's go OK. Okay, so please select the file. That's good. Good stuff. We'll hit OK. Please enter a date. Please enter at least one AP test. Then one JV test. Good stuff. Please enter a high value amount. Oops. Type mismatch. Okay, so we did something wrong. I forgot something here. Oops. And script is complete. And what I forgot here is because this is a string, and I want to take this as the value. Oh, no, I don't. Let's go back and see. Sorry. So, line 119. So what am I doing wrong here? Oh, I'm using it somewhere else. Where's 119? Ah, that's why. Sorry. That's why. See, I define this as a double. I can't define it as a double because when it returns, I can return anything, so it's got to actually be a string, and I forgot that. So let's just go change this to a string. I could go change it to a double afterwards, but I could go in and validate to make sure that it's proper. So here, I'm going to change this just to a string, and same thing here. And actually, it's not the amount field I want it. I want it, sorry, the high value items. So there we go. So let's go try that again. There we go. So we'll go select file, start date, yes. Please enter a number. Please enter a number in the high value field. Okay. So I'll do 12.25. And I click on OK, and we're fine, and it exits. So we've validated all the information. So now we know when we're going to actually be using the information in the IDEA script that it's correct. So one thing I did forget earlier on is for the start date, if I go and run this, I can go in and overwrite what I want in the start date, and I don't want that. I want the user to have to force to use the calendar, and then them not go in and change it. Because if I use the calendar, I know I have a certain format that's going to be returned, and then I can work with that format. If I leave the start date open, then the user can go in and make any changes, and that may cause syntax errors and everything like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable this edit box so the user can see the date, but they can't go in and change it. And how I do that is I'm just going to add in a line of code at the very end of the function, and it's called dialog enable. And then I go grab the name of that ID. And then I'll just enter in 0, so it's disabled. So now if I go run this again, so it's disabled, but I can still go use it, so it'll show up, but the user can't actually go in and make any changes to it. And then finally, we've done all this, is now we can go in and write our code, which I'm going to leave that to anybody want to use it. But how we do this is we've got if not B script, exit script then. So how we do this is we've got our arrays to check out the AP tests. So here I'm going to add on a variable called I so we can go through them. Or actually, we don't have to use that. What we got to do is we can go through and we can say, if IP test, 0 equals 1, then, message box, test 1, and if. And we can go in and do that for each one of these. 1, 2, 2, 3. So we're testing to see if the user had selected these, and if they did, then we'd have a call to that test, whatever it may be. So let's just go run this. So let's go select our file. We'll just enter in our number. So I'll do test 2 and 3. Then I click on OK. Here we got the test 1 and test 3. So there you go. So there is your script that will go through your dialog script that allows you to go through, select tests, enter in different information, and so on. So hopefully this has been useful. I'm planning on a few other scripts to do different other aspects of the dialog, but I thought I'd want to put something together that's sort of all in one, that walks you through all the different steps and the majority of the different things that you might come across when you're creating a dialog. So hopefully you enjoyed these things, and please leave any comments either here or on IDEAScripting.com. Thanks.